from the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is AgDay.
Coming up on AgDay, brewing with a taste of home.
I asked whether barley could be grown in Texas. Was anyone growing barley for the beer and spirits industry? And I quickly discovered they weren't, and that to me was just an injustice.
Meet the maltster looking to leverage Texas grains. Machinery Pete shares his final thoughts of 2019, and wheat prices rally to close the week as analysts look forward to 2020.
I'm going to get asked a lot in the short term, what do I do with my cotton in the near term? It's a tough question. I think demand is still so sketchy at this point.
AgDay, presented by the Chevy Silverado and the all-new Silverado HD, the strongest, most advanced family of Silverados ever.
Good morning, I'm Clinton Griffiths. Soybean prices climbing to their highest point since mid-2018. Wheat prices ending the week with a surge. Is this the last gasp of a turbulent year or the start of optimism for 2020? National reporter Betsy Gibbon joins us from the AgDay newsroom with a look ahead. Betsy.
Well, Clinton, the markets are trading during a holiday week, which means anything can happen. So that optimism may just depend. However, analysts are looking at China for their price forecasts, and 2020 is no different. Just in time for the Chinese New Year, 2020 is considered the year of the rat. But here at home, analysts wonder if 2020 will be all about corn.
We need to also remember that liquidity ratios continue to deteriorate for a lot of producers. And quite frankly, it's not cheap to put corn in the ground. And so, I think that if the price ratio is 2.2 to 1, then yeah, you're going to plant a heck of a lot of corn. But if the price ratio gets 2.4, 2.5 or more to 1, I think that with the amount of cash that people have in their pocket, there's still going to be a lot of soybeans planted.
The focus, however, remains on China and the U.S. to see if a Phase 1 trade agreement will be signed and if a commitment to buy $40 billion worth of ag products comes with it. 2020 brings ethanol export potential to Mexico, Asia, and Japan, especially China. U.S. biofuel producer Green Plains projecting China is capable of importing 1 billion gallons of American ethanol compared to 200 to 300 million in the past.
With the addition of some major markets, it could take upwards of 1 billion gallons. And then a lot of these, what you want to call singles and doubles, it can take anywhere from 100 to 200 million gallons. That'll all add up to get to where we want to be by 2022, and that's 4 billion gallons of exports.
Analysts saying African swine fever will be more of an impact than we think.
We don't know yet what all the ramifications are going to be from this.
Roll in the Australian drought, and Close thinks some livestock sectors will see profitability.
On the beef side, I think the cow-calf guys will be kind of in this continuation of the break-even mode, modest liquidation. The stocker guys still really dependent on weather and what we have for winter forage grazing conditions.
Although some analysts expect soybeans could still potentially see soft demand from China.
It's going to be difficult to get them to really go back to where they were on soybeans, and whether they're going to buy it just to store it. But corn, they could use some of our corn to blend with some of their lower quality corn. They could use some of our ethanol to meet their goals for cleaning up their air quality.
Will it be the year of the corn or the soybean? We won't know until the new year arrives. Reporting for AgDay, I'm Betsy Gibbon.
All right, thanks, Betsy. Speculation over how much China could buy in a Phase 1 trade deal spilling into markets at week's end. Wheat continuing to rally on speculation that China could buy 5 to 6 million tons of U.S. wheat. Chicken company Sanderson Farms saying a recent poultry agreement with China has jump-started exports. Earlier this month, they shipped their first container of chicken feed to China since 2015. They're now loading another 12 boxes. That's according to Bloomberg. And the U.S. pecan growers hope to reclaim their foothold in the Chinese market. Prices have fallen 40% since 2017, when 3/4 of in-shell exports were headed to China. A winter storm moved through the heart of the country at the end of last week. Meteorologist Cindy Clausen joins us now with more on its impact. Cindy.
Yeah, that's right. We had first the Southwest that was experiencing some heavier rain and higher elevation snow that moved right up through the plain states and into the upper Midwest. And we had a lot of moisture in those areas. And when we had those warm temperatures, we had that snow melt. And now we're adding a lot more snow to that. Some pretty hefty amounts, especially in eastern parts of the Dakotas and Nebraska. And so, yeah, interesting to see those amounts as they're coming out this morning. Meanwhile, in Kentucky, nice Christmas week weather had farmers out in the field. James Boyd of Hodgenville, Kentucky sent us this picture via Twitter. He said that he was out digging winter wheat plants and counting tillers. Last year, Kentucky farmers planted 460,000 acres of winter wheat. At the end of November, in USDA's last winter wheat condition report, 52% of the crop was rated good to excellent nationwide. Coming up in just a little bit, I'll take a look at your national forecast. Clinton?
Researchers are spending time in some of America's premier rivers trying to understand what's killing freshwater mussels. Running 300 miles through Appalachia, the Clinch River is one of the most important rivers for freshwater mussels in the world.
When you look at the total picture of the environment here in Southwest Virginia and down into the southeast, you've got one of the richest biodiversity spots in the entire world.
But scientists are rushing to discover the cause of a massive mussel die-off on the Clinch. They're also trying to discover whether it's related to similar mussel die-offs in at least 6 U.S. rivers and several others around the world.
That means that this mussel has probably only been dead for 24 to 48 hours at the most.
Richard and his team are searching the river in northeastern Tennessee for recently dead pheasant shell mussels. The rocky bottom is littered with the white shells of the dead.
This is a pheasant shell, Actinonius pectorosa. This is the species that we've been the most concerned about with the die-off in the Clinch River.
46 different species of mussels and 133 species of fish live here. The pheasant shell mussel, until recently, was one of the most abundant species on the river.
And so in 2016, before we saw the major problem emerge, we had approximately 94,000 pheasant shell mussels that lived in a 200-meter stretch of the river right behind me here. Now, as of 2019, we have less than 14,000 pheasant shell that live in that same stretch.
Freshwater mussels can filter around 8 to 10 gallons of river water each day, cleaning it of algae, silt, and even heavy metals, helping make a better environment for fish, amphibians, plants, and bugs.
First and foremost, you lose that water filtering effect. So all the stuff that's in the water that gets pulled down by mussels and transformed into food for everything else, that effect would disappear immediately. And so you'd have cloudier, more turbid water. You'd be more prone to algae blooms.
Over the past century, mussel populations everywhere have declined steeply due to pollution and habitat loss. Yet the current decline looks to be something different, maybe a pathogen, maybe something else.
One of the first questions that comes up when we tell people we have dying mussels is, could this be caused by climate change? Is this due to pollution? And the answer is probably always somewhere in the middle. Even if we pinpoint a single specific pathogen or disease that is the reason that the pheasant shells are dying in the Clinch River right now, there's probably more to it than that.
The search continues as answers so far have continued to disappear downstream. A potential trade deal with China has cotton exporters on notice. We'll dive into that market and expectations for 2020 next in Analysis. And later, celebrate the new year by celebrating the ingredients that make up a party favorite. A Texas malt made with Texas grain, today in the country.
Let the proven performance of Prosaro fungicide maximize your grain quality, yield, and profit this season.
Optimism around a U.S.-China trade deal helping push oil prices to their highest mark in more than 3 months. Brent crude topping out just under $68 a barrel last week following an American Petroleum report showing lower U.S. inventories than traders expected. Now, Brent has rallied 25% in 2019 thanks in part to supply cuts by OPEC and Russia. Cotton futures ending the week near the $70 per hundred mark. The adjusted world price also climbing to end the month, now topping 58 cents per pound. It's now at its highest point since early July. John Payne, author of This Week in Grains and Oilseeds, our guest today. And John, let's talk about this cotton market because in the December supply-demand report from USDA, we did see them pull back on production expectations for 2019. What does that mean for this market, and how does that shake out for planting in 2020?
Well, I hate to say it's a gift because the producers who didn't grow it, they're not looking at it like that. But from the trade perspective, if somebody's just buying paper cotton in a way to make profit on it, it's been a gift. We've had 3 straight reports now where you've seen reductions. So you and I would have spoke this late summer. We were looking at carryouts at the back end of this year, 7.5 million bales. Yeah. It dropped to 6 in I think the Oct report. Now eventually we're down to 5.5. So we've kind of slowly chopped away at that big supply story. All the while the China trade talks have gone well. So we find ourselves in a little bit of a different dynamic here. You have new crop corn prices. I wouldn't say they're high, but relatively they're going to pull some acreage. You have the story in soybeans potentially bringing in higher prices there. Cotton at 68 cents is not going to bring a whole lot of action. So Texas A&M, I think, predicted this week sub 11 million acres. Okay. That is a recipe for, I don't say a disaster, but a recipe for a real spike this summer if we don't grow it. So I'm going to get asked a lot in the short term, what do I do with my cotton in the near term? That's a tough question. I think demand is still so sketchy at this point. I'd almost venture to say sell it and try to re-own it some way. But if you can't afford to hold it, I think this summer the opportunity, and again Q2 is what I'm really looking at, April timeframe. That's when we tend to peak. So I think you kind of hold on here, and we could see July going to the 70s, 75 even. But if we go too quickly, you'll pull acreage. So. Yeah. That's the kind of dynamic I'll be watching here in the short term, is kind of what those new crop prices do, and I think that'll affect what that next year's carryover looks like.
And probably some of that is going to be driven by the whole Phase 1 trade agreement and whether or not China kind of comes back into this market in a real big way.
Absolutely. I think that's part of it, actually physical purchases, but there's another side of this, and when they sign this deal, you notice the Chinese yuan strengthened quite a bit. And that, in my opinion, is the cotton market. So you see the yuan strengthen, cotton tends to float higher because all of those Southeast Asian currencies who buy our cotton, that floats as well. So it's good news all around to see this trade deal, I don't say get wrapped up, but to have Phase 1 signed will be a boon, and I think the spec traders aren't in cotton right now. So if you're looking for a kind of a wild card play into the summer based off acreage and production, I think that would be a decent play.
All right, well, appreciate that perspective. Thank you so much, John. We'll be back with more Ag Day and a check of weather coming up here in just a minute.
To find John's newsletter, This Week in Grain and Oilseeds, head over to www.thisweekingrain.com. Ag Day, brought to you by Corvus Corn Herbicide from Bayer. Get an early season win against weeds with Corvus for end of season rewards.
Meteorologist Cindy Clausen taking a look at our drought monitor to start the week here. And Cindy, some of these places will see a little bit of relief from that storm over the weekend.
Yeah, especially in parts of the plain states. The Southwest did get some of that moisture, but maybe not quite in the areas that we could really use it here. We still see some pretty big dryness in the Four Corners region, right in the heart there. But a lot of the moisture we had last week was a little bit further to the south of that. Now, we did see over the weekend some of that coming up through Oklahoma and Kansas, and then into parts of the northern plains and into the upper Midwest. So we'll see maybe a little relief from there. And then we still have some really dry conditions in Texas. The dryness has actually moved further to the north up into the Pacific Northwest. We were drier down into the Southwest. And as we look at the root zone moisture, that is really reflected in our root zone moisture, how dry it is in the northwestern United States. Also dry down in Texas, where we were seeing some of that on the drought monitor. Now, things have improved a great amount on the drought monitor in the southeast, but you can see from the root zone we're still dealing with dryness there, while we have some pretty wet conditions in much of the north central United States. All right, this week, where can we expect some maybe drought relief? Well, that would be down in Texas, as we're looking at some above normal precipitation that goes into the southeastern United States. We're also going to look at above normal precipitation for the upper Midwest, the Great Lakes, and into the northern plains. Maybe a bit on the dry side, parts of California, Nevada, and into Utah as well. Now, as we look at temperatures, we are looking at, for the most part, above normal temperatures as we head through this week, kind of continuing the trend. Now, I don't think we'll be quite as warm as what we saw over the last week, but we will continue to see temperatures at least a little bit above normal in a lot of these areas, cooler than normal temperatures in the southwestern United States. Now, over the next 30 days, though, overall, we're looking at a cooler trend coming your way as we get into the northern parts of the United States, but on the warm side as we go along the Gulf Coast states and as we get into the Pacific Northwest. And then as far as precipitation, that's going to be on the higher side in the southeast, so some of those same areas we're looking at for this week. And we're looking at above normal precipitation, parts of the Four Corners region, the southern parts of it anyway, down into the northwestern part of Mexico. Maybe a bit on the dry side in the Pacific Northwest, but fairly normal as you get towards much of the nation's midsection. That's a look at your national forecast. Now let's check on the weather where you live. Wiggins, Colorado, mostly sunny for you today with a high of 31 degrees. Bowie, Texas, plenty of sunshine with a high of 54. And Brandon, Vermont, look for a wintry mix today with a high of 35 degrees.
Up next, one final week of 2019 wisdom from Machinery Pete.
30-year-old tractors, well, they used to be antiques. Today, no way.
"2019 has been a year across farm country." Well, Machinery Pete, he shares his final thoughts and perspective of 2019 from his home office in Minnesota.
Well, you know, folks, as 2019 draws to a close here, it gives me pause. It was 30 years ago, 1989, that I started compiling auction sale prices. And I remember at the time, I was a 23-year-old kid, there was a definite, clear feeling that 30-ish-year-old tractors were antiques. I mean, they just were. 1950s models, we all thought of them as antiques. Well, I wrote a blog over the Christmas holiday that got a lot of discussion going. And I went back to our old auction price books from 1989, and I made a list of the 20 highest auction prices on the 30-ish-year-old tractors back then. And here's that list. So you can see basically for $2,000 to $3,000 you could buy the nicest 30-year-old tractor anywhere, with $3,600 being the top of the heap for that John Deere 630 sold September '89 in west central Minnesota, back where I grew up. So they were antiques, but today 30-year-old tractors definitely not antiques. I mean, John Deere 55 series, Case IH Magnums, they're just not antiques. Now here's a list from 2019 of the highest auction prices on the 30-ish-year-old tractors. And you can see top of the list here, that 1989 John Deere 4955 with 2,225 hours on it. Sold February 23rd out in St. Mary's, Ohio, brought $71,000. Now, looking forward, I think you'd agree with me, folks. These tractors are not antiques now, and I don't foresee them being considered antiques anytime in the near future.
Well, many of you may grab a beer this New Year's Eve. That classic beverage wouldn't taste the same if it weren't for some impeccable ingredients. We'll meet a Lone Star startup hoping to bring the taste of Texas grain to more glasses across the state. As we ring in 2020, New Year's celebrations may include a special brew or two. In Texas, a new business is stepping in to help craft breweries create a locally grown beverage. Take a trip to Blackland's Maltsters with the Texas Farm Bureau.
For beer, malt is essential. You cannot make beer without malt. Malt is basically the backbone of the beer. It gives it the color. It also is a major contributor to the flavor if it's not overshadowed by hops. Brewing with my buddies and getting into craft beer, I'd go to the homebrew store and I'd buy the malt, and it was coming from different countries. So I asked whether barley could be grown in Texas. Was anyone growing barley for the beer and spirits industry? And I quickly discovered they weren't, and that to me was just an injustice. Our agriculture is just such a large part of Texas. And I felt compelled, like I had to do this because I had the potential to provide the world with something it has never seen before, Texas malt. Brewers can't take barley and wheat out of the field and then try to brew with it because it doesn't have any of the enzymes. And so what a malt house really does is we grow enzymes. We really tightly control the germination of the grain to develop enzymes that are then used in the brewing process later. The three major stages are steeping, germination, and kilning. Here at Blacklands, we do the old way. We floor malt. Up until a couple hundred years ago, all of it was done on the floor, which is the traditional method that the grain gets spread out on a cool floor, really thin. And people have to turn that by hand with shovels, rakes, and so forth. Farmer Larry grows our hard red winter wheat out of Hutto, just down the road from here. And this is a hard red winter wheat that's been grown in the area, not necessarily for us or for malting, right? But Larry's just really great at producing really good quality wheat. So my thought is, well, we have to get our hands on this, and we have to turn this into a suitable malt for beer, right? Because why not?
He said he wanted to come look at my wheat, and I said, "You want to look at it?" He said, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, that's unusual." He told me that he was going to make malt out of it, and I said, "Well, I don't know anything about malt." So he bought a couple of big bags of wheat, and we've been customers on and off. Depends on the quality of the wheat.
If this is what the land is giving us, this high protein wheat, high protein barley, then we as maltsters need to do the hard work of figuring out how to use it. It has unique flavors and characters, but it has an authentic story. You know, and we're saying, look, this is what the land in Texas gives us. let's make a beer that represents the land and the people that work it. And let's tie all of these elements together. There's a larger story here that we're trying to share around the people.
And that's all the time we have this morning. We're sure glad you tuned in. Start your week with us here at Ag Day. From all of us, I'm Clinton Griffiths. Have a great day.